Hey guys, this is the moment you've been waiting for. So finally digging into everything that I experienced and learned on a carnivore diet. I know that a lot of people have been asking me for a long time to put out this video and do a podcast, so here it is. So why am I doing this? Why is this video coming out? Well, because I did a carnivore diet, which is only eating animal products for a total of 5.5 weeks. I went through everything and cataloged everything, and I had a tremendous response, so I wanted to go through. I got a lot of Q&A in here, hundreds and hundreds of questions. I boiled it down to about 50 here that we're going to answer, I'm going to dig into. Of course, if you guys have any questions, just pop them below and I'll make sure to get to them. But let's just get started here. The first question is, why did you do this? So I believe in testing. If I try to recommend something for people and I don't know myself how it impacts anything or them or their health, I think that's very, very irresponsible. So I heard about the carnivore diet, maybe last year in the fall time, and I thought, bogus, there's no way that that's beneficial and there's no way that's good for a human. Then I started to look into it a little bit, and I always try to update my thinking models and not just be stagnant and dogmatic about what I believe. And so I looked into it, it sounded compelling. People had a lot of great anecdotal evidence that they felt better than they've ever felt in their lives. People were using it to treat things like rheumatoid arthritis, gut problems, skin problems, cancers, things like this, that they hadn't gotten relief from any other diet before. So I said there must be something to this. I looked into it more. I have my own hypotheses now about why it's effective and why it works, but couldn't deny that people were getting massive benefits from it. To that regard, people were asking me if they should do it, and I can't recommend to somebody, look, here's something you should do, and I've never done it before. I just think that's super fraudulent, and so I said, let's do it. I was planning on doing it for a while. I moved from San Francisco to Austin in New York, kind of splitting my time now. In February, things were a little hectic for a while. I did this from basically the start of March 1, all the way through April 15th. And so about 6 weeks is what we did. It was fantastic. My overall impression was that it helps with a lot of different things, but I've never felt more energy, more mood clarity, and just overall physically better than I think any other nutrition plan that I've ever done. Question is, what did you eat on this carnivore diet and what is allowed on a carnivore diet? So I ate about 90% of 2 different meats that I get from a ranch up north called 3 Bar Ranch in Austin, but that would be grass-fed beef and wild boar. So those are the things that I felt best eating. Those are the ones that kept me full the longest. And I had some seafood, some cheese, a little bit of dairy, nothing crazy. So that was it. That was 99% of my food. I had some spices, like sometimes I use rosemary or salt and pepper, but nothing too crazy. Like I wasn't dousing my stuff with sauces or any type of crazy spices like that. I try to keep that to a minimum because I don't want any kind of interference there. For instance, the rosemary is used, for instance, when we cook high temperature meat, because I want to keep the carcinogens down and I want to make sure that the meat is as healthy as possible. I had coffee and tea for drinks. For supplements, I used a lot of electrolytes because I don't think meat provides a lot of those things. So really buffering up the electrolytes, as well as collagen, which is again a meat product. So you can argue that it's not totally carnivore, but for me, that's what I had. Eggs, again, a huge staple. I think that if I ate any breakfast, which we'll get into in a second, I didn't really eat that many breakfast meals. It was mostly eggs and maybe some bacon. And that's it. I just couldn't get really fresh seafood in Austin, being landlocked like that. So that's why I didn't eat as much seafood. But I know people who do this, they eat 50% beef and 50% seafood. That's what we did. Micronutrient supplement. Did I take one? The answer is yes, and it's called beef liver. So I had some beef liver tablets, but mostly I just ate organ meats about 3 to 4 times a week. And that came with 3 primary organ meats: liver, heart, and brain. And so these are the things that I was eating most often, and I just got them from the local butcher. And yes, they're not great, but you put a little butter on them, put a little salt on them, and just choke them down. That's my strategy. And a lot of people use the U.S. Wellness liverwurst, which is kind of this good blend of organ meats that you just cut up a slice and eat it. So I did that 3 to 4 times a week, and then took liver caplets as well, just to make sure that my micronutrient levels were as high as humanly possible. Did you include dairy, and should I include dairy if I'm doing a carnivore diet? This is something where I think that, yes, if you tolerate dairy, fine. I don't think it should be a problem. If your main goal is for weight loss, I think that you can miss a lot of weight loss by consuming dairy because there's a little bit more sugars in dairy than there are in just general meat products. I also think that people get really far away from a real or whole food when they're thinking about, oh, I'm consuming dairy. Well, no. I mean, when you eat things like cream cheese and sour cream and stuff like that, it's pretty processed, and it's not something that's really that natural. We have to go through a lot of process steps to get there. And so I would do raw milk cheeses, raw milk, things to that nature, but nothing like, I wasn't eating cottage cheese and cheese sticks and cheese singles and stuff like that. That stuff is just not food. And so if you do not know if you can tolerate dairy or not, I have a link on my website, dranthonygustin.com, where I chat all about how you can figure out your own dairy tolerance and what works for you as an individual. That has been super helpful for a lot of people. That's kind of the elimination and reintroduction plan that I had a lot of my patients on when I was in practice, and it worked great. So if you don't know if you can tolerate dairy, I would say eliminate it for now until you figure out, eliminating it and putting it back in, and that you respond really well to it. What were the serving sizes of the meat, and did you get meat sweats?
Whew. Here come the meat sweat.
So to answer the meat sweat question, nope, totally good on that. It was hot in Austin when I did this, so I was sweating because of the heat, but not because of the meat consumption. The serving size per day, I would say it was anywhere between 1.5 to a little over 2 pounds, just depending, I think, my general hunger levels and what I was up to that day. I was not tracking and making it being specific of like, I'm gonna have 1 ribeye today and this and this and this. I just ate if I was hungry, and that's primarily what I ate. So what that looked like was generally 2 ribeyes a day, or like a ribeye and 1.5 pounds or pound of grass-fed ground beef, just mixed up and cooked and then eaten because it's so easy to do so. But yeah, that's about it. So I ate just whenever I was hungry and until I was full. And that was it. No more tracking. I wasn't tracking any kind of calories or fat to protein ratios, anything like that. I was just eating semi-fatty meat, so ribeyes, ground beef, things like that. The wild boar is a little fatty, and just eating until I was full, and then just that was at 8 when I was hungry. What were your daily calories? Again, I don't know because I didn't measure, but I would guess anywhere between 2,200 and 3,000 depending on the day and what composition of fat to protein I was getting, but that's kind of where I was at. Was I grass-fed only when I was eating organ meats? So yes, the organ meat question I already answered before, yes. And then grass-fed only, I would say primarily grass-fed. I just bought a quarter of a cow from this ranch and cooked most of my meals. But if I were to go out to eat, I wasn't as concerned about getting grain-fed because the amount of grass-fed to grain-fed I was eating was just completely imbalanced, so I didn't really care that much. I just didn't care if I was at a restaurant. A lot of good barbecue in Texas, not a lot of grass-fed barbecue there, and so if that was the case, I think my body can handle a meal or two here or there that's not grass-fed totally. What cut of meat would you eat forever if you could? I would choose a ribeye for sure. It's the perfect blend. You get that just marbling on the outside. It's fantastic. 1,000% I would eat ribeyes, and I just did not get sick of them. I would eat them every single day, and I would continue to do that. What were your blood sugar levels? So blood sugar, and this might come as a shock to some people. I just released a video last week about how blood sugar just does not matter when you're eating meat and protein. A lot of people in the ketogenic community think that you eat all this protein, then your blood sugar just spikes like crazy because of gluconeogenisis. That is not the case, okay? So gluconeogenisis, when you eliminate carbohydrates, is a demand-driven process, meaning that your body only makes as much as you need to do, for red blood cells, for brain function, for all this other stuff. So it's not like you eat protein and it spikes your blood glucose just randomly because you fill the tank of protein. It doesn't work that way. So I tested every morning my ketone levels and my blood sugar levels. So first, the blood sugar levels were anywhere between 70 and 80 upon waking, and in the afternoon, roughly the same thing, which is how it was on a ketogenic diet and how it was on a carnivore diet. So eating 2 to 2.5 pounds of meat a day, if it was something where protein spiked your blood sugar like crazy, that would not have happened. And so that's something that I think that people, they refute it, but have never tried this themselves. And so I think that if you were to really dig through it and experiment, you might find that there's no issue with protein levels and blood glucose levels. Ketosis, were you in it or were you not? Yep, so this is another thing. If blood glucose raised so much when you're eating protein, and if eating protein kicked you out of ketosis and you need to keep protein moderate to low, this would not have been a ketogenic diet. However, the same levels I had on a nutritional ketosis, which is about 0.8 to 1.0 millimolar, I had on a carnivore diet the exact same. And so there was absolutely no change to if I was eating low to moderate protein versus very high amounts of protein. So again, this is something that is like super practical when people look at it and they refute it and they get all upset and say, oh, I'm going to be kicked out of ketosis. I would urge you to test for yourself and see what works for you. Maybe it just worked for me. I don't know. I also we'll get to training a little bit, but I was also working out and keeping my body active, and that has something to do also with using protein in a certain way. So I'm not saying that this is for everybody. However, you need to test it on yourself before you get all crazy and start leaving comments below. What is the ratio of protein to fat to stay in ketosis? There isn't a certain ratio. So if you're looking to get into ketosis in the first place, I think that people are eating too little protein. So what you need to do is set your protein to about 0.8 grams per lean pound of body mass. And then after that, limit the carbohydrates to anywhere between 25 and 35, and then eat fat into whatever you want after that. So whatever that ratio is for you, is whatever ratio it should be. I don't think that there's a magic thing of, we studied a ketogenic diet at 85% fat, 10% protein, 5% carbohydrates. I just don't think that has to hold for most people. It can be 60% fat, 40% protein. It would still work for a lot of people. And I would estimate that I was getting about 50-50 or 40% fat, 60% protein in this diet. And maybe that's why I felt so amazing. Who knows? We'll chat later about why I think the carnivore diet works and why it was better for me than a ketogenic diet. But yeah, there is no set ratio for ketosis. What about gluconeogenisis? It just doesn't matter. Flat out, it does not matter. So don't worry about it. Gluconeogenesis is derived also from fatty acids. So basically a triglyceride is 3 fatty acids on a glycerol molecule. That glycerol molecule makes glucose. That's gluconeogenesis, just the same way as protein can turn into glucose, so can fat. So it's something that you actually want as a human to use gluconeogenesis, and so don't get freaked out about it. Totally chill. Blood markers. So this is something that I wanted. Obviously, a lot of people are asking me, like, did you get your blood markers? Blah blah blah. Sean Baker, who is a huge proponent of this diet, he's an MD. He was on the Rob Wolf podcast, and he released his blood work markers after, I think, 1 to 2 years of being on a carnivore diet, and a lot of them were not something that made people happy. However, I think that they looked at the numbers as a whole and didn't really look at what blood work shows you for an individual level. Okay, so first, what we don't have here is what a normal is for even a ketogenic diet. So we don't know what reference ranges are normal for someone on a ketogenic diet, and we sure as hell don't know what reference ranges are normal for somebody on a carnivore diet. And so this is something that is just completely misunderstood, is that if you're in or out of a reference range from getting your blood work and think something is out or something is in, what we know is that the reference range is set on people who generally go to hospitals who are sick. This is not where I want to be. I don't want to be marketed or compared to somebody around who is just completely sick. What I want is a reference range for how a body generally works on fat or on protein or whatever. So that can be so different for person to person. So in the case of Sean Baker, I think that a lot of stink was thrown up about something that people just don't understand, which is reference ranges as a whole. For instance, hormones can change, but the way that hormones are used is also different on a ketogenic diet, for example, rather than a high carb diet. We know how people operate on the standard American diet and what their blood work should look like under that, but not what a healthy normal is otherwise. And so that's something that's just important to know before we really dig into the blood work here. Second, blood work is a snapshot. And so as you'll see, there's not much that I'm worried about here. A little bit of history I'll give you in a second, why I think some numbers are off a little bit. However, it's a snapshot. I did this twice. I would want to see for sure to be conclusive about this, that 1, it's not bad for me, or 2, that it's good for me over a long period of time. And so this is not definitive thing. So I don't want people to say like, well, this guy did it, his blood work looked like that, carnivore diet is good forever or is bad forever. That's just not how it works. So I would want to test this over the course of, let's say, 12 months and get maybe 5 to 6 readings so that I could say like, oh, okay, so this didn't change much from month 1 to 3, but month 3 to 6, like we're starting to go in a certain trend. So blood work is all about trends over the long term and not necessarily snapshots in time. And that's really important to think about. So it's kind of like a movie. Like if you took a trailer of a movie, a 3-minute trailer that is showing a 3-hour movie, okay, if you take 2 snapshots, there's no way you're gonna understand what that movie's about, okay? But if you go from 15 snapshots over the course of a trailer, starting to get a little bit more data here, and you kind of see where things are going. Same thing with your blood work. Okay, so third thing to be clear, this year I've had food poisoning 4 times, and so I've had a lot of gut issues since January. It's been absurd. I just have not been able to recover. I've been traveling a lot, stressed out, working, it's been nuts, and then just food poisoning one after another. So I tested my gut while I was doing this carnivore experiment, and actually had a lot of still infections from the food poisoning, which we'll get into how it maybe affected some of these numbers to begin with, and what I'm doing to treat that moving forward. So triglycerides moved from 124 to 112. So we actually saw an improvement there, which doesn't surprise me, just from the decrease of carbohydrates going from some moderate amount to even lower than that. HDL went from 45 and didn't move, went to 45. I've been around this range my whole life, not much has affected it, so I'm not really worried. Some people might say, it's too low, it's too low. For me, I think that's totally fine. LDL went from 166 to 188. So again, it's been in between 150 and 200 my whole life. This is nothing that's out of the ordinary for me. I have 10 plus years of labs to see where my trend's been, and it's never really been too crazy, so I'm not concerned about that. If you've listened to my podcast with Dr. Bill Davis, we talk a lot about how these things don't really matter unless you get an NMR, which is you get broken down your particles into different sizes and things like that. But when I did my before marker, this is what prompted me to get a gut test. I had a small LDL particle size of 1262, which is super high. And so I'm usually below 200, 300, 400, and seeing it at 1262 was frankly pretty alarming. And so that's why I ended up doing the gut test in the middle of the carnivore diet experiment, so I could see, okay, I actually feel really well, and we'll get into how these other markers didn't really indicate any type of cardiovascular problem, so it got me concerned. And so I did a gut test and figured out that I had a lot of inflammation in my gut, some pathogens that are still there that I need to work on. And when you have gut inflammation, what can happen is formation of these small LDL particles can increase dramatically. And so what happened is I took it before, and then the after amount was 1469, and so that is a pretty similar range for that. So if my particle size went from like 300 to 400 to 1500, I would say a carnivore diet did not work for me conclusively. This has to do with how my gut is reacting to things, and it was already inflamed before, and it was still inflamed at the end of the experiment. So here I am not worried at all, and we can dig into more tests as we go along, but this is something that I know some people are probably gonna freak out about, but the fact that it was high before I tested it, I have a gut problem, I know where this is coming from, then we can move forward and treat this intelligently instead of just thinking that, oh, it's from this carnivore diet. This is just not the case. Lipoprotein A was 5, which is afterwards, 4 before, so extremely low, no problems here. CRP, which is a main marker of inflammation, went from 0.69 to 0.84, and anything under 1 is considered extremely low. So again, 0.69 to 0.84, I could go in on a Monday and go in on a Tuesday. It could get that normal variance. There's always normal variance to blood work, and things can change from day to day to day. So that is something that does not alarm me at all. Glucose went from 84 to 86, so no changes there. Insulin from 3.1 to 4.1, again, a normal shift from day to day, not worried about that. HbA1c, which is a marker of how glucose is affecting your red blood cells. Again, if it went from 5.0 to 5.0, so it didn't change. And if this was a case where protein was spiking blood glucose all the time, this number would have went up over 6 weeks. Testosterone went from 708 to 834, so actually a pretty good bump there. Vitamin D went from 80.7 to 57.8. And the change here is I was supplementing a lot as I wasn't getting a lot of outdoor time, and I was traveling a bunch, and wanted around kind of 60s where I feel best and have performed the best in the past. So stop supplementing, and now I'm right around that range, which is perfect. All kidney markers stayed the same, which were normal or decreased, which is good, and counter to what everybody says about how eating protein is going to jack up your kidneys. Just didn't find that with me. Liver markers all stayed the same or decreased. Same thing here, where people think that eating a lot of meat is a huge burden on the liver. Just wasn't the case with me in this short period. Thyroid markers all again stayed the same in the general area. I've never had any problems with my thyroid before, and don't seem to have any problems now. Iron is something that people think you get iron overload from eating red meat. I was eating pounds of it a day and went from serum iron of 107 to 88, iron saturation of 41 to 34, ferritin of 310 to 277. So I actually saw a decrease of iron in the body eating essentially all red meat in my diet. So that's something that I'm worried about over the long period of time either, which is another huge concern about the carnivore diet. From what I saw, everything either didn't change or improved besides one marker, which is the small LDL particle size, which was already high to begin with due to my gut inflammation. So to me, not a huge problem. The point I want to make though, again, like I said in the beginning, is that this is only 5.5 weeks of data. I was talking to Chris Masterjohn about this, who is just a savant at dealing with blood work and markers and measuring things through your blood. And he said he would like to see at least about 12 weeks. So this is something I'm going to try to do later in the year, is about 10 to 12 weeks of a little bit of a modified carnivore diet, 90-95% meat and a little bit of plant matter, what I think is good. And again, we'll get into that later. And do it probably at 1 week blood work, 6 weeks and 12 weeks, just to see if there is any kind of trend lines that shift over that period of time. So again, this is a very short window, and sometimes stuff doesn't change for a long period of time. And so take it for what it is. That's how long I did it for, and this is what we have for the information. If you guys want any other blood markers, or you want me to measure anything that I didn't cover here, maybe I did measure it, I just didn't cover it, there's a lot of information, or I can add it to the next round when I do it in the fall, and then we can get some more clarity around myself as a guinea pig and what my data shows. Okay, what were your pH levels? I don't know, I think this topic is just a bunch of bullshit, actually. I don't think that pH levels matter at all. This is one of these things, like when you eat cholesterol, it's not like your body just raises cholesterol because you're eating it and it goes straight into your bloodstream. It's just, your body is a very, very tightly regulated system. And if you were just to randomly raise cholesterol because you ate eggs, you'd die. And the same thing with acid and alkaline pH levels in your blood. Because you eat something that's acidic does not mean that your blood turns acid. It's just an insane thing. It's a very, very tightly regulated system. And this is just not how your body works. There are things that can shift your body from an acid state to an alkaline state, just like there are things that can raise your cholesterol, but it's not how the system works. Your cholesterol responds and raises due to the amount of repair that it needs to do, because it's a repair molecule. And so, for instance, you have high LDL, this molecule goes up and repairs things. It's not because you ate cholesterol. It's because your body has a higher demand for repairing things. And the same thing with body pH levels. There's no amount of juice cleanse that's going to help you fix it, because it just doesn't work that way. It's not like you stop drinking coffee because it's acidic, you're going to improve your alkalinity. It's an absurd statement, and it's just not how the body works. So I don't know what my pH levels were, but they're probably pretty normal. Did you get enough fiber on a carnivore diet? So actually having a gut problem, and one of my previous podcasts with Dr. Michael Ruccio goes into depth about this like crazy, but fiber, I think people overrate fiber to a dramatic degree, and I think that most people do really well decreasing fiber, especially for a limited period of time, because you basically give your gut a chance to rest and heal. And people just generally do not need as much fiber as they think. The whole misconception about that you need tons of it for gut microbiota is, again, I think we just don't even know anything about the microbiota when it comes to this. Listen to that episode. I don't want to make this all about gut health, because we could go on forever about this. But yeah, I mean, there's still some fiber with protein. So you get proteoglycans and the contents of cartilage. So in like eating off of bones and things like that are actually pretty fibrous and can feed bacteria in your gut that produce short chain fatty acids, just the same as if you were eating a bunch of salads, for example. Obviously the degree is much less, but it's enough for me I felt completely fine. And I don't even think we have an idea of what we should be measuring over the long period of time to say that this was good or bad from a fiber perspective. So I'm not worried about the whole fiber thing, and that's my opinion on that. How was your digestion, gas? Were you uncomfortable? How were your bowel movements? So perfect digestion, and this is something that when I'm talking about when I had a gut problem, a lot of people don't realize that you can have problems in your gut that do not manifest as gut problems. And so I generally just don't feel that inflamed. I feel totally fine. We saw the marker, the small LDL particle, so I investigated further and screened my gut and saw a lot of inflammation there. It's not like I had a bunch of gas or bloating or anything like that. Gut problems can manifest as mental fog, they can manifest as joint pain, they can manifest as skin issues. And so this is something that I think that people don't realize, that screening the gut is super important. If you find anything like on a blood screen that doesn't make a lot of sense, using the next step as looking through the gut is super important. I didn't have any clear gut problems. Switching to a carnivore diet, I actually felt great. My gut felt awesome. I didn't have any kind of problems. No gas, no bloating, no problems not eating fiber. Bowel movements were normal 100%, so it was just normal consistency, normal just once a day, and normal color. There was no changes. It was just they were much smaller, and so that's obviously the bulk decreases. A lot of animal products, the majority of it, are absorbed and used so that your small intestine pulls them out, all the nutrients in there, and puts it to use. What happens with a lot of plants that you eat is your body it just chews it up and can't absorb a lot of it. And then so that goes through your gut, and that's why you have bigger bulk in your stools. So just reducing the amount of plant products, reduce the bulk of the stools, but still just a normal once a day type of deal, which is completely fine. Was there an adaptation period? This goes back to a gut issue is what I think. So a lot of people can have an adaptation period here if they've never done a ketogenic diet before, or if they've been even moderate carb just from switching to a zero carb diet. I think that's an issue that people can have with a adaptation period. I had one, not because of that. In my opinion, restricting 100% of fiber in your diet, you can lead to what's called a bacterial die-off phase. And so so let's say I have a bunch of bacteria that shouldn't be in certain parts of my gut, most of that is fed by carbohydrates and by fiber, even in small degrees. And so when you remove all fiber and all carbohydrates, your body starves those bacteria die, they get split up, and then your body has to process them and basically spit them out. And so that period is called bacterial die-off period. That can happen when you treat the gut, and that can lead to things like headache, aches and pains, etc. I just kind of felt like it's super lousy. My energy was low and super high in headaches all throughout the day and couldn't shake it. Electrolytes didn't help, water didn't help, nothing helped. And so my hypothesis for me, that's what I went through in about 7 days. After that, I felt phenomenal. Most people I've seen quit a carnivore diet at like 6 to 10 days because either they're traveling, they don't want to stick to it, they go through this adaptation phase and don't feel well. But after that is the best that I've probably ever felt in my life, and which we'll get to in a second. How was your cognition / emotion / energy? I would say at the highest amount that I've ever had in my entire life. So I had a huge phase shift when I moved from kind of a standard healthy diet of whole grains, lean turkey, stuff like this, to a paleo-centered diet. I felt amazing, huge step up. Then when I switched to a ketogenic diet, I had another huge step up. Now, when I've switched to a carnivore diet, now I'm getting another step that I felt benefit from a ketogenic diet to carnivore diet, which is amazing. I did not expect myself to feel even better than I did on a ketogenic diet. So my energy was way more boundless throughout the day than just the ketogenic diet. I would still have some lulls in the afternoon, etc. All that was gone on a carnivore diet. My mood, extremely positive. I feel like I didn't get frustrated once. Nothing else really changed in my life, so everything else kind of stayed constant. Still a lot of work. Still did a lot of morning routines to take care of myself, but my mood was just incredible. My cognition, my mental power, I feel like I could go and work all day long and have no problems, and not having to think about food, I think was actually a huge relief for me. And so that was a huge benefit that I think we got from switching to a carnivore diet. So I felt incredible, way better than I did on a ketogenic diet, which I didn't even think was possible. So just from that alone, I've kind of toyed with it, and we can talk later about what I do now for the carnivore diet and nutrition. But yeah, just amazing. I was super blown away after day about 7, 8, 9. I kind of went through this transition phase and felt just incredible the entire rest of the time, every single day consistently. Did I have any weight loss on this diet? So I had, I think it was a little too short. I'm pretty lean already, so it wasn't much to notice, but it did feel like things tightened up a little bit. I got a little bit leaner without really changing anything else. So in my opinion, what I would do is if I wanted to get super lean, and I had a period, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, where I wanted to just get really ripped up, this is all I would do. I would just do a carnivore diet, and I would just eat till I'm full and keep doing it that way. It was actually super hard to eat enough food, and I would try to stuff my face with steak and with meat and all that stuff. I just couldn't get overly full. It just didn't matter. I only wanted to eat maybe 1 or 2 times a day. We'll get to that in a second as well. But yeah, I think that if my goal was to lose weight, lose fat specifically, and keep lean muscle mass, I would do this diet in a heartbeat. If anybody out there is listening and they've even tried a ketogenic diet and really, really want to do some fat loss, this, in my opinion, is one of the best things that you could be doing for yourself. Any issues with eating plants afterwards and reintroducing them? I did not have any issues. I went from that level of feeling on carnivore down to the level of feeling like I was back in ketosis. So it was just back to baseline on a ketogenic diet. It wasn't like I had any rebound effect where I felt like shit from eating kale or avocados or whatever. There was no energy crashes. It was completely fine. So no issues there. Again, it was only 5.5 weeks. I don't think anybody should eat any strict diet for 12 weeks, 18 weeks, etc. Like, you should mix things up. That's how humans have eaten for a very long period of time. I think that makes sense continuing that way. Did you intermittent fast? I would say yes, and more so than usual. However, I'm not a big fan of scheduled intermittent fasting. I know it's very popular for people to look at fasting in general and say that, oh, I'm an 18-6 kind of guy, or like I do 16-hour, 8-hour window, and I just don't think that way. I just don't eat if I'm not hungry, and then I eat if I'm hungry. And so generally that looks like I would say like a 20-hour fasting window for me, just because I think I'm so fat adapted. I've done this for so long that I've just kind of gotten the habit of eating one large meal with maybe some snacks around it once a day. But even less so in a carnivore diet was I hungry or wanted to snack. I think that, like I was mentioning before, no matter how much I would eat, I would feel just content when I was done. And it was like I couldn't eat one more bite. I think a lot of this has to do with the hyperpalatability of food, where most times you have, even if you're eating a ketogenic diet, you have 3 or 4 different things that you can go in between and eat, which you can eat way more. And even in a ketogenic diet, I would feel super full after certain meals where I would eat more than I probably should have, and it's like, oh, that like gut-wrenching feeling. Not once on the carnivore did I feel that way. So I always just felt super content after the end of the meal. I could not force feed myself, and then I was just super, super satiated until maybe the next day. And so that looked like most days. Around 5 to 6, I would have a giant protein meal and be completely satisfied after that, and then just not be hungry until the next day, till about 3 or so. Even if I would work out, if I wouldn't work out, same thing here. So I would say 50% of the days I had one meal only, and then the other 50% were maybe a 4 to 6 hour eating window. So it wasn't the fact that I was trying to do it. I just wasn't hungry. I just don't eat when I'm not hungry. It's period. So that's how I approach it. And I would say the windows were tighter on a carnivore diet. How was sleep? Sleep was no difference. So I had no problems with sleeping. Felt great. Good 8 hours a night. I'm pretty strict about my sleep routine, and I guard my sleep very carefully. So I think that I was already at a pretty good baseline, but didn't really notice any effects there. How did I respond to workouts? So I felt phenomenal, especially after that first week or two. So I'm doing kind of 50-50 gymnastics and strength hypertrophy training, and I don't think I've ever felt as recovered after specifically gymnastics workouts, just because there's so much load on your joints and your connective tissue that I could feel sore pretty easily in weird spots, like in my wrist or my elbow. And I felt like I recovered tremendously fast. I felt my strength went up effortlessly. Like I didn't have to push as hard in the gym. It was really fascinating. I would love to see how that would translate over a course of 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. And that's just what I noticed. It didn't make me hungrier, which is weird when I eat a ketogenic diet, or even not. I always feel way hungry on the days that I work out and way less hungry on the days I don't. And I didn't get that response either. So there's something to that. I was super interested in that. So that's something I'm going to be paying attention to a little bit more closely if I do a longer experiment with this. But overall, felt incredible with my workouts. Should there be a diet before a carnivore? I would say absolutely. You should figure out what ketosis looks like for you and get fat adapted and figure out how that feels before you get to a carnivore diet. If you are just eating a standard American diet or not super fat adapted, and you try to go to a carnivore diet, going to 0 carbs, it is going to hurt. It doesn't matter how much electrolytes you can pump in there, you are going to feel not great. I'm telling you right now, I've done it before where I've gone basically from eating a moderate to low amount of carbohydrates and not really a keto into a fast, which is 0 carbs. It felt awful. I would highly recommend doing a week or two of a ketogenic diet before you start dipping in and getting your feet wet with a carnivore diet. Are you worried that meat will give you colon cancer, diabetes, heart disease, etc., etc., etc.? No, I am not. This is something where before I started looking into a carnivore diet, I largely thought a lot of the research was bogus, but there might be some legitimate claims on increasing protein and having certain timing and not having like an excessive amount of protein. I just didn't look into it that much, so I wasn't that educated on it. After I looked into it more, talked to some more people, and really looked into the research, I found that there is nothing here that is substantiating the claims that meat causes any type of problems. I tried to look far and wide and figure this out, and no research actually claims this. What does claim it are a lot of headlines, and so you really need to be careful. If you do not read the research yourself, and what I mean by that is like you have full access to the paper, you read through all the methods, why they did stuff, how they measured it, how they got to the conclusions, or if the paper or whatever publication didn't do that as well, or you don't have access to that information, just don't even think of that as a credible source. There's so many times where a conclusion out of an abstract will be spun a different way and be publicized, and that will be shared over Twitter 5,000 times, and then everybody goes, oh, well, yep, knew it, meat causes cancer, gotta lay off, which is just so ridiculous. Nina Teicholz does a lot of great work here in breaking these things down and boiling it down to like what really matters. Sean Baker pulls apart a lot of studies all the time. There's just nothing that I've found that actually is conclusive and shows in an isolated environment that meat causes any problems whatsoever. So that's where I'd say, nope, not worried about it, especially because I felt incredible. Almost every single blood marker of mine improved. Like, what am I to worry about? Like, everything looks good in the short term. Obviously, I would track it over the long term, and that's something that I do religiously anyways. And so I'm not worried about that. I feel like I would find something before it become a problem. I would know energy levels and subjective measures as well as objective measures as well. So not worried about it at all. Are you worried about eating too much protein because mTOR will be elevated? So this is another thing where so mTOR is a pathway in your body that when you have protein and some other stuff that it increases, and that they've shown with certain animals that increases aging and can lead to a host of other things like cancer, etc. I think that we are in infancy about this topic, and I think that what we need to look at here is, okay, if we don't want growth, we want to limit mTOR, okay? I am also a male who works out, who is telling my body this is how you should grow. What I wouldn't do if I was like a completely sedentary person, I didn't move my body or use it or give my body any of these signals of this is how you should use this protein in these pathways and these signaling molecules, I probably wouldn't eat as much protein. However, I think that all people should be moving their bodies with some resistance, which I think that tells your body where to put the growth molecules. Instead of putting it into increasing cancer cells, I want to increase lean mass. And even if, let's say, worst case scenario, we're right about mTOR and modulating and eating a super low protein diet, I live 2 years, 4 years, 5 years longer than I would have otherwise. If that means that I have a less quality of life because my subjective measures are less, again, I felt the best on a carnivore diet. If that means my lean tissue goes down and I'm not capable to do things and I'm not as strong and I'm just a frail old man in the age of 60 and not a robust human being, I would trade those 5 years personally for me, even if this is something to worry about, for higher quality life over the course of my life. That's what I would look at, and that's what I would go for. Maybe a personal opinion, but even in the worst case scenario here, I do not care about mTOR as far as how it relates to protein. Did you eat blueberries because bears eat blueberries? I did not. I love blueberries as well, but I think about when I eat animal products that these animals have consolidated the food for me. So for instance, I eat a cow, it ate a bunch of salads for me and I get to eat that cow. And same thing with bears. I didn't eat any bear this time, but it just consolidates the blueberries for me. Am I worried about the microbiome? Nope, like I said, I think this goes a long way into helping me with my gut issue and starting to treat it. There's a lot of things that I think I need to work on as far as antimicrobials and different, like a more robust gut healing program that I'm doing right now. But I think that reducing the fiber, again, we've talked about this in the Dr. Michael Ruscio podcast about how most people need less fiber and not more fiber. And I think that when you eat a carnivore diet, you kind of give your gut a break so it can focus on just healing itself. And that way you can starve bacteria. You let as most stuff is absorbed in most food in a carnivore diet is absorbed in your small intestine. A lot of problems happen structurally in the large intestine. You kind of give the large intestine a break. And so for instance, if you have SIBO or any what's called bacterial overgrowth in your small intestine, where there shouldn't be much bacteria, where food gets absorbed, you're starving that out, and you're basically killing off that bacteria that shouldn't be there. Good thing. If you have IBS or inflammatory bowel syndrome or things like that, where you have problems with your large intestine, which is your bowel, then you give it a rest. I guess, as I said, my bowel movements were way smaller. Therefore, there's not as much distress in churning out food 3, 4, 5 times a day like you would in a high fiber diet. So removing all this fiber actually can give your gut a huge break. And a lot of really strict gut protocols, I mean, look at them. They're all essentially zero fiber. And so that's something that I think that we should be looking into a little bit more, as the carnivore diet as actually a gut treatment protocol. And so I'm doing some thinking on this and maybe developing some stuff that people can use to their advantage. So I think that it can actually help a lot of gut issues. I'm not worried about it myself. Like I said, we just don't know enough about the microbiome to even make any conclusions that more or less or what this diversity or that diversity is good for us as a human. So we just don't know. Did I ever get bored? How to avoid boredom? I did not. I loved this diet actually. Like I said, I love ribeye. I love eating meat. The only thing that got me was being in Austin and having it be 95 to 100 degrees and humid and eating hot meat. Oh man, it's brutal. It's brutal. And so I just wanted sometimes like a cold avocado or like a smoothie or something like that. How I got around that, I just drink a lot of cold water, cold brew, and ate my meat cold at times. So like I would cook up a bunch of ground beef and then just eat it with a spoon cold out of the fridge. Maybe I'm a little bit of a weirdo like that, but it worked really well for me and I felt amazing. So then I was just committed to getting this data for you guys so I could share it. I still enjoyed my meals. I still had the social aspect of meals. I was still eating with people, and so I didn't lose that. I think that if it was I was just a freak in isolation, only eating stuff, and didn't have these normal benefits that you get out of eating, then I think that it would be tough for me. But I generally, I didn't find that I needed any more mouth pleasure from my food. Like a lot of people just need crazy amount of diversity. I still enjoyed all the meals I had. So I had no problems at all switching to this diet. I wasn't ever bored. I was never thinking like, oh man, I really, really need an avocado right now. I mean, people just get, switching diets, they get so stuck into a mindset. Instead of thinking like, what will this do for me and how does this affect my life in a positive way? People think about what they can't have. So I think that boredom, when you switch diets, is just all about mindset, and that's a good practice to switch to a carnivore diet, to realize that you don't need a ton of stuff to make yourself happy when it comes to food. People use food as such an emotional layer and trigger that I think it's good to remove all that so you can kind of have a better quote unquote relationship with food. But yeah, I didn't get bored at all. It felt great. What do you think the minimum amount to try for if I wanted to start a carnivore diet is? I think 1 month is a good place to start. And I think that, like I said, sometimes between the 7 and 10 days, I think people are going to have a lot of negative effects. And unless you get over that hump and then really get to like the 2, 3, 4 week mark, you're not going to notice a lot of things in your body change. You're not going to notice a lot of energy pathways change. You're not going to feel great. You're not going to have the kind of the big experience of saying like, oh, okay, this does work for me really well because of this reason or not. And if you feel just the same on a carnivore diet and you want to eat a ketogenic diet, great, feel free. I don't think that this is a must. I don't think that people need to be doing this type of a diet, but I think that it's super, super helpful to do stuff so you just have more tools in the toolbox. If, for instance, like I mentioned earlier, for you, this works really, really well for fat loss, and in 3 years from now you want to lose some fat, then you know that this is the route to go. This is what you should be eating, and this is how you should be looking at food, and that's it, period. You just have another tool in the toolbox. So there's no downside to doing it, in my opinion. Just do it, figure out what works for you, like what you got out of it. And if the answer is nothing, then it's not a great tool for you. If the answer is, I feel mentally sharp as a tack when I do this, unlike anything else. Okay, now I have to do a lot of work output for the next 3 weeks. I'm gonna eat a carnivore diet. Awesome. I don't wanna be as hungry. Great. I wanna not worry about food. Do it. So this is something that I think that until you get to that 3, 4, 5 week mark, you're not going to experience what this tool can do for you fully. So I think that that's probably the minimum that you should commit to when you do this. Is it bad to have nuts and veggies once per week? I think that same as the question before, you should just try it and give it a go 100% all in and see how you feel after that time. I know some people who, for instance, can only, they're using a carnivore diet to treat certain illnesses and they feel amazing when they're on it. They can't even add in pepper. So they can do avocado oil and meat and that's it. And some salt and that's it. If they add in pepper, if they add in herbs or spices, they're screwed. And so I think that just getting a clean slate and a baseline of like, okay, this is how I would feel if I only ate animal products. And then you can start adding things back in one at a time in a reintroductory phase to see that, okay, if I add in kale, I feel pretty awesome. Okay, next week I add in nuts. Well, now I feel like shit again. Or now I feel like not as good. I don't feel as mentally sharp. Getting that baseline of what a month on strict carnivore feels like, I think it can help you realize and identify other food intolerances or sensitivities that you may not know if you just keep adding things in once a week. And so I think that getting a whole month under your belt of this is what I'm gonna do, this is what I'm gonna feel, this is what I wanna get out of it, and then after that, adding stuff back in so you see how you can tolerate it, that's how I approached it. And that's where I kind of came up with what I'm doing now, which is about 80 to 90% of carnivore, and then the rest added back in of very low fiber foods. And so we can talk about that in a second, but yeah, I think that that's the best way to do it. Go strict for a month, then add stuff back in after that. Did you consume alcohol? Yep, I drank maybe 4 to 6 times to start this experiment. And I don't know if people out there have drank in keto and you get pretty buzzed up pretty quickly. Carnivore is a different thing. Like I have 1 or 2 drinks and would not need any more for the rest of the night. I drink mezcal. I think I drank dry farm wine once or twice, which is like tested to be very low carb. I wanted to though eliminate even that because there's a lot of polyphenols in wine. I didn't want that to interfere with anything. So mezcal is just, it's kind of like tequila, but even higher quality. And I just like it. I love the taste. And I knew that whenever I've drank it before, I've never had any kind of blood sugar issues, no ketosis problems, no hangovers, anything like that. So that's what I drank. Like I said, 1 or 2 drinks though, I was feeling it. And so be careful if you're drinking on a carnivore diet. It'll rock you. Do you think carnivore makes sense forever? I think that, like I mentioned before, if you are treating a specific condition and you feel like you get benefit out of it that no other diet can serve you, and it's the most effective tool for you, then I think it makes sense long term. Do I think it makes sense for everybody long term? I do not. I think there is still good things about plants. I don't think plants are the devil. I just think that we have the paradigm probably flipped where we're overeating animal or we're undereating animal products and we're overeating plants. And I think that if we switch that and move in the other direction, a lot of people would feel a lot better and get better results in their diet. So I do not think that it's imperative to be doing carnivore forever. Do I think that it is smart to do it forever? I think if you feel decent having some plants and it doesn't rock you from a condition standpoint, I think that you should probably have some plants long term. And we can get into that in more detail about why I think plants are still essential. These are tools. You don't have to do everything forever. Test it out, see how you feel, learn something from it, and incorporate it into your nutrition. I'm nowhere even close, in my opinion, to figuring out a perfect diet for me. My goals in my life is always changing, so I think this will be a lifelong experiment for me of always tweaking and seeing, does high protein, does low protein work for this, for that. I just want to build the most robust toolbox that I can have to use for anything that I want to use it for. How am I eating now? Okay, good question. So like I said before, 80 to 90% carnivore. So that looks like the same type of meats that I was eating before. A lot of grass-fed beef, a lot of wild boar, eggs, and then I've added back in a lot of low-fiber vegetables. And so think about the vegetables that you can throw in a pot and cook down, and there would be nothing left afterwards. A couple spoonfuls. So like kale, spinach, etc. A lot of sprouts, a lot of microgreens, which you get a lot of bang for your buck with those plants. Again, I'm trying to reduce fiber so I give my gut a break so I can heal, because I'm on this gut healing protocol, which calls for a lot of low fiber. I'm incorporating avocados, which are not low fiber, but I just like them a lot. And then coconut products, so coconut oil, MCT, fermented foods, some dark chocolate, and a little bit of nuts, but not anything too crazy there. So pretty simple. It's just a giant whack of protein, and then I fill it in with a little bit of plants after that. So maybe some sauerkraut and some microgreens. I have a bunch of images on my Instagram if you guys want to see what I'll be eating lately, but it's pretty close to how it gets. So a big chunk of protein and then some stuff afterwards. Example I had last night for dinner, 1.5 pounds of rabbit sausages, which were phenomenal, and a tiny, like a half of a bunch of kale cut up and steamed, and half of an avocado. That's all I ate yesterday. So that's how it was. I felt amazing, and it is now 1:30 in the afternoon, and I still have not eaten since last night, which is very common for how I felt on a carnivore diet. At this point, I think that the big question that's left over is, why does a carnivore diet work? Like, what are my thoughts? Like, okay, we saw that there was a large amount of people who had a lot of benefits from this. I had a really great response to it. But why is that the case? I think that there's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to actually make another video about this and post it on my YouTube channel. So people who are listening to the podcast, just head to my YouTube channel to see this video. I'm going to include it there, and then I'll link to it in this YouTube video and in the show notes in the podcast. But this is something that I think is a separate idea and a separate structure and a separate conversation rather than just a Q&A, so I'm going to put that there. But for people who are now watching this video and saying, okay, you had this great experience, this is what happened for you, should I do this? Should I do a carnivore diet? Again, if you want to see how it feels for you, go ahead and do it. You can stop at any time. It just does not matter. So I urge anybody who's interested in doing it, regardless of what you're doing or what your goals are, and you think, I want to see how that is, just do it. Like you can stop after a week if you don't feel good. You don't have to continue to do it. I think that it's, again, a very fascinating thing. A lot of people are getting a lot of benefits out of it. So if you're curious, you should 100% do it. The subset that I don't think it would work really well for are people who are trying to avoid a lot of growth. So let's say, for instance, you have an active cancer diagnosis. You have an active illness where you do not want growth of tissue. Don't do it. You're a competitive athlete and you're in a competitive season, and you're not in a really strict off season. Don't switch your nutrition like crazy, okay? Use what's working now to fuel yourself through that. If you're just a normal person and you want to see how it works for you and you don't have any of these crazy circumstances, go ahead and try it out and let me know how you feel. Let me know if you have any other questions. I want to be as helpful as I can, as humanly possible in this regard. So if you guys are watching this, if you have any more questions, go to the YouTube channel or to my Instagram and send me a comment or right below a question, and I'll try to get back to you. Maybe I didn't cover everything here. It was a lot of kind of repeat questions in all the information that I had. And then I will be doing this again later in the year for about 12 to 16 weeks, just depending on the time frame of what I'm doing now and the diet I'm eating now, but maybe even a little bit more strict carnivore and less vegetables and less plant matter. So if you want me to measure anything with that, just let me know. If you guys are just watching this video for the first time and never heard the podcast, head over to the podcast, Keto Answers, and subscribe to that for weekly interviews and way more content that's on the YouTube channel. And then just it's a long video, a lot of ranting, so thank you for tuning in. And if you guys, like I said, if you have any more questions, just head below or I answer every single question that I get on Instagram, so just DM me there and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Other than that, we'll see you next time.